Hey guys, so today we're going to learn about the rise of ancient Rome. So we just finished up learning about Greece, and now we are making a transition a bit to the west in Rome. So some essential questions for our unit on Rome will be, how did Rome grow from a village struggling to survive to a vast empire? How did Rome manage to dominate the world for centuries? How did Rome transition from republic to empire? And how did Rome fall? Our essential question for today is that first one. How did Rome grow from a village struggling to survive to a vast empire? So, the founding of Rome. According to myth, the Roman Empire was founded by a pair of brothers named Romulus and Remus. These two brothers were children of Mars, the Roman god of war. When they were born, a jealous king feared the twins would take power from him, and he ordered them to be drowned. So he was worried that these babies would grow up and try to become king, so he had his servants go and drown them. However, the gods protected these infants and sent a female wolf to rescue them. The wolf raised the twins until a shepherd found them and raised them as his own. The twins grew up, killed the unjust king, and built their own city, Rome. Unfortunately, after they founded the city, Romulus killed Remus. Many people believed that this is why there was so much drama in Rome, in terms of killings and murders and all sorts of stuff like that. So there are a bunch of lessons that you can learn from this. It teaches us a lot about what the Romans valued. We learned that the Romans valued justice and loyalty. We learned that people who broke laws were severely punished. It was against the law to kill a son or daughter of a god. And the king, when he tried to kill the sons of the god, was breaking a law. And people highly valued the favor of the gods. What that means is people tried to get the gods to like them, to be on their side. Geographical advantages. So the first people to settle Rome weren't thinking about creating a huge empire. They chose the area because it seemed like a good place to live. And there were a couple of different reasons for that. First, the hills made the area easy to defend. The soil was fertile, and the site had a river, the Tiber River. Over time, the Romans discovered it had other advantages too. Rome's position in the middle of the Italian peninsula allowed Rome to easily control Italy. And Italy's position in the middle of the Mediterranean allowed them to easily control the seas. Italy is also smack dab in the middle of Europe, which made it very easy for Rome to start expanding and to control more and more of Europe over time. Here's a picture of Italy, and that arrow is almost pointing at the city of Rome. You'll notice that it's right in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, like I said, and it's also right in the middle of Europe. So we have some questions, like, who actually founded ancient Rome? Well, unfortunately, it wasn't actually Romulus and Remus. That was just a myth that the Romans came up with to explain their heritage. A group of people called Latins founded Rome around 800 BC, and they came from a region called Latium. But they didn't stay in power for long. 200 years later, around 600 BCE, people called Etruscans held power in ancient Rome. They didn't speak Latin or Greek, and for a while, Etruscans ruled Rome with all-powerful kings. So the kings did whatever they wanted, and they only paid attention to their own needs. Over time, the Romans became very tired of having an all-powerful king who didn't respond to anyone. So in 509 BCE, the Romans revolted against the harsh reign of one of these Etruscan kings. His name was Tarquinius Superbus. Superbus sounds like superb, so he really just thought he was great. Unfortunately, the Romans didn't think he was great, so they killed him. And after that, they decided they didn't really like this idea of having kings. Romans did take a number of different ideas from the Etruscans, including some of their gods, the Greek alphabet, and the toga. So they did, even though they didn't like the Etruscans and how much power they had, they did have a number of different inventions that they took from the Etruscans. So, Rome forms a republic. After removing the last Etruscan king, the Romans vowed never to have a king again. Over time, Rome expanded its territory and tried to find better ways to govern. By 264 BCE, Rome had gained control over the entire Italian peninsula and had firmly established a new form of government, the Republic. What's a republic, you might ask? Probably you're not going to, but I'm going to tell you anyway. A republic is a place where citizens have the right to vote to select their leaders. So they themselves are not voting like they were in ancient Greece, but they're voting for people to make choices for them. We have a republic today where we vote for different leaders and leaders make decisions for us. In ancient Greece, they had something called direct democracy. A direct democracy is where you vote on every one of the decisions for yourself. We do not have a direct democracy. We live in a republic. In the Roman Republic, the Senate was the most powerful part. The Senate proposed and voted on new laws. So just like our Congress, the Senate made up the rules. This first Senate, the very first, was made up of 300 upper-class men named patricians. Patricians were the wealthiest, most powerful people in ancient Rome. So it only made sense that they were making the decisions. Just like in ancient Greece, they were the ones in charge. Rome also had a system called consuls. Consuls were two chief officials, and they led the government. They were like our president. They were responsible for enforcing the republic's laws and policies. Consuls were elected by the Assembly of Citizens. The Assembly of Citizens was different than the Senate. It was a group of lower class people, poor people, and they were designed to act in the benefit of everyone, not just the wealthy like the Senate. But the Senate still had a voice and still advised the consuls on what to do. Consuls were only supposed to rule for 1 year. That was their term. Power was divided equally between the consuls, and both had to agree before the government did something. If one consul said, veto, or I forbid, a matter or law would not go any further. So one consul had the power to shut down everything. In case of emergency, if consuls couldn't agree, that had the potential to cause problems. To prevent this, in case of an emergency, the assembly, who you remember, is made up of poorer people. The assembly could appoint a dictator to serve for 6 months. What's a dictator, you might ask? In Rome, a dictator was a Roman official who held all the powers of the king, but could only hold office for 6 months. So he was allowed to make whatever decisions he wanted, and he could enforce them. But unlike a real king, he only was allowed to be in charge for 6 months at a time. Power in ancient Rome. In ancient Rome, there was a system called separation of powers. This meant that power was split between the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches of government. So there are three branches of government. We have three branches of government today. The executive, which makes up laws, the executive, which enforces laws, the legislative, which makes up laws, and the judicial branch, which looks at laws and figures out what they mean and how to use them. So like I said, the executive branch in the Roman Republic was made up of two consuls. Consuls were elected for a one-year term by the assembly after 490 BCE. The assembly, like I said, was made up of poorer Romans. The consuls led the government and controlled the army. And if just one of the consuls vetoed a law or a decision, that was it, and the idea was dead. The legislative branch was made up of the Senate and the Assembly. The Senate had 300 members and was made up of patricians. They were selected by the consuls to serve for life. Meanwhile, the Assembly was made up of plebeians. Plebeians were lower-class Romans. These folks didn't get to make the laws, but they did get to advise the Senate, and more importantly, they got to select the consuls. Here's a picture of what the Roman Senate looked like in a famous movie. We don't actually know what the layout of the Senate might have looked like, but this is an example of how it might have looked. So, the Assembly. The Assembly was another part of the legislative branch. The Assembly was made up of plebeians. Plebeians, you remember, are what? That's right, poor or working class Romans. They elected tribunes as representatives. Tribunes were the names of the representatives that they had. So they weren't senators, but they were called tribunes. These people helped make the laws, but more importantly, the tribunes selected the consuls. Here's a picture of a tribune giving a speech to his plebeian constituents, or the people who would vote for him. The judicial branch was made up of 8 different judges. Each of these judges got to govern one of the provinces in ancient Rome, and they served for a whole year each. So you'll notice in ancient Rome that there's this whole notion of term limits. Everybody only gets to serve a certain amount of time. So, in addition to being the governors of these different locations, the judges would also help to make sure that the law was being enforced and try to figure out what the law meant and what it means to have that law in each different province. Okay, so that is a little bit about the foundation and the government of the Roman Republic.